Hey everybody. So I'm going to be talking about Restore NYC, which is the Christian nonprofit that I spent time with. And Restore is focused on ending human trafficking. I got to take part in their webinar series right now called Freedom Lab, which is essentially a educational and awareness boosting kind of program that they are doing for a period of time to help, elevate the kind of population's awareness of what human trafficking is and who it affects and what it's like and things like that. So I will go ahead and dive right into the second question, which is about the ethical variables and methodologies at play. And so the first thing I'll talk about is that they are Christian. And so when I asked how does that inform what they do, they cited Isaiah 61 as kind of their mission verse, which talks about binding up the brokenhearted and proclaiming liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners. And so thought that that was quite fitting for them and the fight for to end human trafficking. And they also talked about how they want to provide holistic care to the survivors that they're interacting with. And so they want to be thinking about all the aspects of what it means to be a person and how they can provide and facilitate freedom in all of these ways. So I thought that that was quite important. And they also talked about how it is important for them to not proselytize the survivors, which I think is an extremely important and can often be a challenging place for a Christian nonprofit to be, but it's important. And they talked about how they want to maintain the dignity and the agency and the autonomy of the survivors, and that includes kind of this like religious respect and dignity, and not imposing anything on them during this really, really sensitive and vulnerable time that these survivors are in. And so a little bit more into what they do and the kind of ethic there is that there are three big areas that they work in. One is client services, which is primarily going to be counseling. And specifically, it's going to look like trauma-informed counseling that they provide. And they also do comprehensive case management, which looks like what social workers do, and connecting people to resources and social services and things like that. They also do housing, and so they have emergency housing, they have transitional housing, and then they help, ideally get people into independent living situations. And then finally, and what they said was the most important one, is economic empowerment, which looks like job readiness classes, it looks like job placement and entrepreneurship training and investing. And so these three areas are the way in which they fight against human trafficking, and they usher people into living into freedom and sustaining a sustainable freedom, which they talked quite a bit about, which I think is good. And so some of the things that I learned, there's too much that I wrote down, so I'll try to cut it back. But I think the biggest thing that I learned personally about the issue of human trafficking is the concept of intersectionality, and how when persons are being targeted for human trafficking, they're actually being targeted based upon their vulnerabilities, which brings into the fold all of these other injustices that happen on a systemic level in our society that make somebody prone to be recruited for human trafficking. And so they listed lots of statistics here. I'll mention two. They mentioned how 64% of trafficked survivors reported being homeless or experiencing housing instability when they were recruited for human trafficking. 64%. And then the other one is 60% of sex trafficked youths were in the foster care system at some point. And so what's going on when someone's being targeted for human trafficking is the predators or the traffickers are looking for people who are already marginalized in society in some way. And so that makes them prone to all of the nuances that go in the way in which the traffickers reach out to and kind of try to recruit people for these kinds of things. So I thought that that was very interesting. And, in kingdom ethics, they talk about this a little bit, and they talk about, specifically on page 244, they talk about the economic kind of intersectionality going on there, and the interaction with capitalism, global capitalism. And they have this term, which I think is a really insightful term, called morality-free global capitalism. Basically meaning that there's no moral compass on anything economic right now. Anything can be commodified, and everything is being commodified, including people. And globalization plays into that, because trade is becoming just growing and growing and growing on an international and on a global level. And unfortunately, that means also people are being traded and enslaved on a global level. And they talked about how this is a $150 billion a year industry. And so this is a very sophisticated and a very, very sophisticated business people who are managing these human trafficking kind of rings and all of it. And and that was a really big wake-up call for me. They talked about, perception management, and how human trafficking tends to be thought of as a very underworld, kind of hidden, secretive, grimy, this kind of unsophisticated thing. And yet they're saying that what they've found is that it's actually very sophisticated, very complex, and we kind of need to be thinking it. We need to be treating it as such, and that and the intersectionality of all of these issues informs the way in which we kind of try to end human trafficking and combat against it. Excuse me. And so, when you're looking at an issue like homelessness, or you're looking at an issue like the foster care system or gender equality, then you're not just looking at one thing, you're looking at all of these things. And that's what it's like to interact and fight against human trafficking, is that you're looking at all of these things together. And that's what makes it part of the challenge for kind of pursuing this and ending this issue. The last thing I'll talk about is what they said that they would like prayer for, and I'll just mention one of them. And it's that when the pandemic struck, they lost 90% of their partners. So most of their partners are in the service industry, and what a partner is for them is somebody an organization that they can rely on, that they have relationship with, where their survivors can find employment with them. And so typically that has been in the service industry, and the service industry has been hit pretty has been pretty devastated by the pandemic, and so have their survivors. So they would love prayer for the service industry to recover, for other partners to emerge, and for things like that to take place. So I'll leave it here for now. I had to cut back quite a bit because it kept being so long, but looking forward to talking more about this with you all in the forum.